Hello, Nick here. Welcome to another video about the Aputure 300d Mark II. I promise you it's not going to be another review video. You've probably already seen the Aputure 300d Mark II out and about on plenty of YouTube reviews. I wanted to talk about when is a brighter light actually better? When would you use a light like the 300d Mark II in your workflow and a part of the productions that you do? If you're in the same boat as me, a run and gun video producer, or a producer who's working very small teams and small crews, or on the kind of low budget, no budget indie filmmaking end, when is this light going to suit you? So for those of you new to the channel, I am a working videographer, video producer. I want to look into the gear, equipment, tools that I guess we want to invest into to become a better filmmaker and cinematographer. So I'm going to be talking about the things that I'm investing in, the things that I'm using on jobs, on spec at work, or on the side hustle and films and everything else in between. So that maybe for those of you in the same boat, maybe you can pick up a couple of things as well, so we can all learn together. I bought this light just over a week ago. Now, for those who don't know too much about the 300d Mark II, it is a COB light chip on board, and it is effectively a single source hard light. There are a ton of reviews out there, but I really recommend a video by Gaffer and Gear. He does a fantastic breakdown on the specs and features of the Aputure 300d Mark II and just how bright it is compared to some equivalent kinds of sources. Definitely go and check him out. I'll leave a link to that video in the description below. I was initially on the fence as to whether I could really benefit from a source more powerful than my current setup. My current setup is a selection of mostly COB style lights or Fresnel lights, ranging from the original 120D. I've got Godox lights. I have the old Kane TV Boltzens LED lights. I've been using COB lights for a couple of years now. I love the fact that they are a single source that you can use straight out of the box as a hard light, or you can modify into a softer source. So most of the work I do, I'd probably say 85% of the time, I'm finding myself doing some kind of talking head, presenting to camera, education kind of video. There's a lot of people talking to camera or talking just off of camera being interviewed, and that's generally where I spend the most time lighting. A talking head is a talking head, right? And I use anywhere between one light, two lights, rarely three lights. I'm not a big fan of 3-point lighting, practicals and natural light. There are of course a lot of variances there, but over the last few years, that's been the mainstay of my work. I didn't really have an issue with the lights I had. So why did I buy the 300d Mark II? Well, I bought it really because it does offer a brighter source as an option. Now, implementing this straight into the kind of work where I do have a talking head or an interview, you know, really the difference that you could get straight off the bat with a 300d Mark II is by making the key light or the light that you're throwing onto your subject's face to actually light them facing camera. You can actually put a lot more output on them so that you're exposing to that light output and having more control over what that background is doing in terms of lighting. So if you're lighting in an environment like this, where you're actually not lighting the background and there's not too much light being thrown back out there, you put the 300d in place of a key light, suddenly you're gonna make the background just drop out of existence almost. You're really gonna be able to kind of add a huge amount of contrast between your subject or the foreground and the background. Implementing this or throwing this straight into that kind of workflow, the only real difference I think is suddenly in an environment where you might have to light your subject or light whatever it is you're filming, and maybe you're filming against some windows or near some windows. Previously, you might have to, roll on some ND onto that window to try and balance the exposure a little bit. So you had some good dynamic range in your image, but you weren't blowing out outside. Or now, maybe you don't need as strong an ND. You probably will need some ND gel still, especially here in Australia. Now suddenly you can increase the brightness of that key, let's say, and as you're kind of pushing up the output onto that subject, whatever's outside the window or in a brighter environment, suddenly you have that a little bit closer within your control, especially if you're filming with cameras that don't have massive dynamic range or don't film in a recording format that's going to allow you a lot of control to manipulate the image in post-production. So straight away it can kind of fit into your workflow there. But if I'm honest, that's not why I bought the 300D Mark II. I think if I just focused on using this as a key light that ran at 30% power until I needed to balance, next to a window or something like that, I think I'd probably be on the fence as to whether that was a good purchase decision or not. What happens when you push the 300D through the Aputure light dome, through a nice big softbox, onto a talking head subject? Well, this kind of framing, I had my mate Sean, who, side note, Sean and I do a video production podcast together called In Focus Out of Touch. If you are interested in video production as a whole and kind of working as a video producer, I'll leave a link for the most recent episode in the description. Sean was kind enough to just stand in for me. I pushed the 300D through the Aputure light dome softbox thing, which will always generally get you a nice soft source. This is exactly the kind of source I'm lighting with now. And I'm showing you the kind of frame that I'll generally go to when I really want nice, soft shadows on a subject's face. The problem when you start then picking up a light source and moving it away from your source, making that your subject, making that light source smaller, you're going to start getting more definition on the shadows. Fine if you don't care too much, fine if that's the kind of look you're going for. But for, again, a lot of the work I do, you really want to beautify the people on camera as much as possible. So by pushing the softbox back by even a meter, you're effectively kind of doubling the harshness of a shadow. That's just the inverse square law. So you can kind of see that, but it means I can move the light further away. I can frame for a wider shot. And because the 300D Mark II has the output available, because I think initially I was lighting Sean at 30 to 40% brightness, and I didn't have a light meter with me, so I couldn't measure it, but you could then push that through another layer of diffusion or a wider frame. So I actually had on hand in the boot some muslin, a 6x6 muslin, was unbleached, so you will see a difference in skin tone colors as I switch between the two. You can actually see, going back to have a look at the shadows, we kind of add some softness back into the shadow, and so suddenly you get a nice wider frame. You can imagine actually you can light more than one person with this kind of style, with this output through a one bigger panel, 6x6, 8x8, 12x12 if you have enough output and you're needing to light that huge area, right? That's how you can start to modify and the extreme output of something like the 300D Mark II. A big reason in starting to think about more powerful light sources is the ability to control and modify that light much more than a dimmer source. That speaks more towards cinematography, and for me that's the area that I want to grow in. Suddenly with a brighter source you have access to affect the greater location environment more than if you just had a couple of small little 1x1 LED panels that were 5 years plus old. They really didn't have much output, and you had to just focus on putting them on your talent or lighting your actors or your subjects or interview subjects on screen. Suddenly you've opened up the scene as a whole, the location as a whole, and how you might want to go about lighting that. And that is why I bought the 300D Mark II. You could start to use this light to add more contrast in the scene in the background. So let's say, you know, I thought, well, maybe you could have like a setup where a character's waiting for someone to come home of an afternoon. I just popped the 300D out the door here and tried to simulate a nice high angle of the sun. Didn't quite get it because I did hit the roof of our veranda out the front door here, and pushed it through the fly screen, and it kind of gave this nice contrasty effect versus just allowing regular daylight to seep in. A lot of people are also asking, you know, 300D Mark II, oh, you could compete with the sun. No, you can't. The sun's the sun. I mean, you can even see it creeping into that corner edge there. Obviously, if you needed a really bright source, you could just use the sun outside. But 300D, I feel, is getting close to being able to at least replicate that feel. So in that kind of scene, I wish it maybe was a little brighter, but I also didn't want to blow that out because I was also mindful that I was filming inside, right? I also threw it over in the kitchen over here and thought, well, let's leave it as a hard source. And let's have I put a topper cutter in basically to block the light partially, because I thought, well, maybe that could replicate early morning, making a cup of tea, and it's throwing, the sun's coming through the window, hitting a shade and throwing a shadow on. And just leaving it as is and seeing what that would do, and adding more brightness sometimes into a scene can just help make it more believable. It's not this perfectly massaged scene. If the scene or the area that you're shooting calls for a bright, early, raw kind of feel, well, something like that might actually work. Again, the 300D had the output, especially when you're inside. Man, you do have the output to do pretty much whatever you want with it. And then really the final setup that I tested the 300D Mark II in was as a book light, a very, very soft source. This is where you throw a hard light into a bounce of some kind. I just had a 2x1, and I threw that through my 6x6 muslin. The result was fantastic. Whether I wanted to go wider or tighter, you've got the same look really, which is just brilliant. What I loved about doing that is the form factor of the 300D Mark II it's tiny. You could tuck this into some really tight spaces and either flood an area with light or modify and control it relatively easy. There are some downsides, of course, to having a brighter source. If you're not as experienced in using brighter sources, which, if I'm honest, is me. The most I've done, you know, I've lit a small group of people. That's the biggest group of people I've ever had to light at once, and we managed to do it with, I think, 3 120Ds actually. That worked fine, but what happens when you start using single sources to throw that amount of light somewhere is you have to be mindful that if you're not careful, you can actually remove the contrast of your image. It's so bright that you might be thinking, well, great, now I can put it in the corner of the room and push it into the room. You're gonna then be throwing light everywhere. Look at the booklight shot where you're pushing through muslin. You've made that 6x6 foot piece of material into a source, so suddenly this light is going to just spill everywhere, wider than even if you just use the reflector disc here. So the benefit is you have greater kind of impact to your scene. The downside is if you're not careful and you don't utilize the control you now need to think about by adding flags, by adding a lot more negative fill and being a lot more mindful of where you put your lights and your sources, you're actually going to struggle to create environments that look super realistic and actually sell for the audience. So, I mean, ultimately, very cool piece of kit, right? But I think if you're on the fence as to whether you should buy it or not, firstly, try and rent it. I mean, there'll be a ton out there anyway, so go and find someone to rent from just to give a bit of a test and a play. If you are run and gun, if you are looking to working environments where you're really just running a couple of lights, you're setting up quickly and you're going in just looking for that balanced exposure, you probably don't need the power of the 300D Mark II. The original 300D, now there's going to be a ton of them for sale. A lot of people will say, well, why not just buy HMIs? Why not buy some other more powerful sources? And you can certainly do that. But like I said, I think for people in our shoes that have come from video production land or no budget filmmaking land, this isn't too much of a step up. I mean, it's a solid light. Aputure have been in this game for years now, so I'm really happy it is a part of the kit. I'm not going to be using it for every single scenario, but just knowing now that I can be a little bit more selective and also a little bit more purposeful in creating the looks and the scenes, especially as I am, hopefully getting into more commercial stuff. It means that I have another piece of kit in the toolkit, I guess, that is going to help me create the best image for the video, for the client, right? So what do you think of the Aputure 300D Mark II? Do you buy into the hype? Are you interested in buying it? Have you bought it? What are your thoughts so far? I'd also be interested to know, what are your go-to lights when you're looking for talking heads, when you're looking at lighting bigger environments and bigger scenes, or do you have an absolute favorite light that you must get in every single shot? I'd love to hear with a comment below. If you did like this video, please give me a thumbs up, and of course consider subscribing if you are, like me, a fellow video producer, developing filmmaker, and we can all kind of be part of this journey together. Alrighty, I will leave it there. Thanks for watching.